Okay, students, so this is the sixth video. It's called video 5 because we had 3A and 3B, didn't we, for grammar. It's the sixth in the series. It's on morphology, so number 5, morphology, which in your terminology booklet is on page, I think, 13, 14, something around about those lines, morphology. So this one is about how words are formed, so the formation of words. It's technically an aspect of grammar, but much more to do with the way in which individual words have been constructed. So I'm just going to start off with a quick video on a quick reference to the types of things we can do with words. So have a look at this word here, like. Now, in most contexts, like would be a verb, wouldn't it? You know, I like you. It's a sort of a stative verb. I like this. I like that. Okay. Morphology is all about what you can do to that word, what you can put in front of it, what we call a prefix, what you can put after it, what we call a suffix. What you can attach to it in general, which is called affixation, in order to change the meaning of that word or do something different with the meaning of that word. So if I was to do this, okay, I've changed that word. I've what we call inflected it. I've given it a different meaning. So to like would be, you know, the infinitive form of the verb. To like, the simplest form of the verb. But I could put an S on the end for sort of this present tense. He likes doing this, or he likes that in some way. So you could put an S on the end in there. Likewise, you could put on the end an ED, couldn't you? Obviously, you wouldn't have a double ED because it's English. You wouldn't have two. But he liked that. Yeah, so normally it would be ED unless it already ends in E. So we could have a different one to show a present tense. Okay. There's other inflections that we can do as well. Okay, so you could put an ing on the end. I am liking this in some way, and then of course the spelling rule in English, you wouldn't have both vowels together like that. You could have I am liking this. But you could also have things to change the meaning of the word in different ways as well. So if you think about what you could go in front of that word, you could have dislike, couldn't you? I dislike this. So we've created a new word by adding something to the beginning of it. Now, interestingly enough as well, you could have, if you change the meaning of the word like to its more contemporary usage, you could unlike something. I could unlike. Now that's a completely different meaning. The unlike is about, as far as I understand, if you unlike something, it's like the thumbs down thing, isn't it, on social media. So to unlike could be something along those lines. So this is all about inflections. It's all about what we do with words. And of course, the simplest ones are inflections that you learn as children. It's all about, you know, words that we put at the end to change the meaning. There are several pens here. Yes, you can even do things to change the actual word class itself, like I penned you a letter, something along those lines. So take an existing word and playing around with it, adding prefixes at the beginning, suffixes at the end, this process of affixation in order to morph or change the words. So in the booklet, we've got some nice examples of how words are formed in affixation. We take the lexeme, that's the word, and we add extra bits called morphemes. So we take the word, the lexeme cat, that concrete noun, cat. We add the morpheme s to make a plural. We take the lexeme, the adjective happy. We add the prefix, the morpheme un, the little unit of morpheme, just a little unit of English, un. Or racism, we take the lexeme race, and we add this morpheme ism, which is used often to create sort of abstract nouns, to create that abstract noun of racism. And of course, you have to be on the lookout for sort of spelling rules in English that we sometimes don't have two vowels together, so we get rid of one. But it's still taking an existing lexeme and adding bits to the beginning and the end of it. Now, there's a really important note here, okay, because you have to be really careful, and this does demand some common sense about English. So I'm going to talk about poo, is what I'm going to talk about. So if you took that word poorly, as you would say, I would say poorly. If you look at the word poorly, it might include the group of letters poo at the start, doesn't it? Yes, it's definitely got poo in it. But there's no way in which you could say that poorly or poorly is formed from the lexeme poo. It's made out of the lexeme poor, yeah, that has a word, a meaning on its own, it's an adjective on its own, and that morpheme that's often used, the suffix "ly." The thing about these suffixes is these morphemes and prefixes is that they're used lots and lots and lots. That's why it's part of grammar, is because it's part of the system of English. It's a little element that's used a lot, and it's sort of almost like rule-based. So whenever you put an ly on the end of a word, it tends to make it into an adverb. Here it's an adjective. But it tends to do something to the word. Whenever you put an un in front of the word, it tends to give it a particular meaning. Okay. So what we want you to do is we want you to, for your revision and for your learning independently, we want you to fill in these examples with your own further examples of these types of affixation. So you can form new words, you can see morphology happening, and it happens all the time, by lengthening or changing existing words. So the terms we want you to learn are affixation, so just literally putting prefixes and suffixes onto a word. So cats become cats, run becomes running, lift becomes lifted. So these suffixes there. But you can also dispense with the morphemes. You can just have lexeme plus lexeme. You can have two words put together, compounded. So if you remember that a compound sentence is two main clauses put together, a compound word, a compound lexeme, is two existing words put together. So cork and screw, wall and paper, you put them together to create a new word, what we call a compound word. Another sort of process is called compounding. Another process to create or modify an existing word would be what we call a function shift. So it's the same word, same morphology, but different semantics, different meaning. And it's an aspect of what we call like derivational morphology. It's changing the word class of a word. So Google is a proper noun with a G, a capital G, isn't it? But if I'm going to Google something, that is a verb. And this is one of the things that some people get confused about word class and grammar. You said that Google is a proper noun. Well, it is, but it depends on what it's used. Remember, grammar's all about, and word class is all about the job a word is doing, not what it actually is in itself. So Hoover would be another example. Hoover was originally a brand name, but from that we converted it into the verb to hoover. And in fact, we even use the verb to hoover even when it's not a hoover, it's a Dyson. Okay, blends are like a compound, but you sort of blend them together and miss out bits of each one. So British and popular is blended into Britpop. Breakfast and lunch is blended into brunch. And you might not have seen this one before, but etiquette, that quite posh word, and internet are blended together to create netiquette, the idea of what's sort of normal, what's polite on the internet. So that's by lengthening or changing existing words, but we've also got shortening as well as a process of morphology. So the simplest one is just abbreviation. You do this all the time. You're gonna go to uni. Yeah, you've shortened it. You've abbreviated that word. Telephone, you've shortened it, but at the other end, you've got rid of the telly. Actually, you've got rid of the that prefix telly, and you've just got phone. Back formation is like a shorter version of that. So it's like a shortening version of conversion. So commentator to commentate, editor to edit. So you can see how it's changed word class, but it's also been sort of converted there. So yeah, so it's a function shift. Yeah, but it also involves shortening as well, to commentate. Initialism and acronyms, you have to get these the right way around. So if we have a look at these initialisms, it literally uses initials, BBC, which is short for British Broadcasting Corporation. Acronyms are like those, but you pronounce it as a word: NATO, ISIS, NASA, AIDS. If I was to put one on there as another example, just to explain it better, scuba, if you ever go scuba diving, you pronounce that as a word, but it's actually short for self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. Okay, so initialism is where you pronounce it as initials, and acronyms where you pronounce it as a word. Okay, over the page then, we're looking at the different types of affixes, derivational and inflectional affixes that you can use. So the inflectional ones don't make the word take a new form, so it doesn't change the word class. It might change the sub-word class, but it's still, a verb is still going to be a verb, a noun is still going to be a noun. So these are the ones that we learn them very quickly actually when we're children. The inflectional affixes in English, we can use S as plurals, that suffix S, letter becomes letters. We can use present tense, I take to she takes, yep. We can use S with an apostrophe as possession, this is Phil's pen, this is John's. ED is the sort of past tense marker in regular verbs, isn't it? Cook becomes cooked. EN is what we call the past participle, a different type of past tense verb. Eat becomes eaten, I have eaten it, still past. ING participle is about this continuous marker, I am cooking from cook, and then ER and EST are used generally for adjectives, so the comparative suffix quick becomes quicker, and the superlative suffix quick becomes quickest, and they generally tend to be used. You might get something like most or more, where there's been a slight change in the structure of the word, but essentially you're still using the same inflections. It's just this dodgy spelling rules in English sometimes. Okay. On to derivational affixes, but then these tends to be ones where you're forming a new word to create a new meaning that derives from the old word and often sort of changes the class as well. So it can change the word class. And there's tons of them. So if you think about all of these words here, there's several different examples you can probably think about right now for each of these, where it's the same prefix, but you can put it on words and it does a similar job. So let's take a couple of these. So un is probably the simplest one. So unhappy, that prefix means opposite of, doesn't it? Not, in a sense, doesn't it? A means non, not, but non. So something like, I don't know, ahistorical would mean not historical. It would mean for all time. What about things like pro? Sort of like I'm pro-life or pro-choice. Those type of prefixes. Derivational suffixes is very often used to change the word class. So, for example, itty and where's our other one? Et is similar as well, but and nus. So nus is quite influential. So if you put nus on the end of the word, it tends to become an abstract noun. You can even create new ones that aren't even in the dictionary. So there's a certain penniness to this pen. There's a certain penniness to this pen. There's a certain paperness to this paper. I'm making it more abstract by putting ness on the end. Itty, responsible would be an adjective, but responsibility would be an abstract noun. Okay, and then ist and so there's tons and tons and tons of them. And obviously one of the issues here is back to lexical semantics. What does that do to the register of a text? Back to pragmatics. What does it do to the tenor of a text, the relationship with the reader? If you're using lots and lots and lots of derivational affixes, and they're quite complex ones, it would probably have more jargon, raise the register, a more sophisticated text. Okay, so what you need to learn then is, you need to learn your inflectional affixes. The thing that makes them inflections is they don't create a new word, they just change the existing one. Usually it sort of keeps the word class, but changes perhaps like a sub-word class. And derivational ones, they form, you create a word with a new meaning that derives from the old word, and often it'll change the word class as well. And then you also, of course, need to revise this idea of lexemes and what you can do to them. So lexeme is another word for word, and the morpheme would be the little inflection, the prefix or the suffix that you add to it to change the meaning. On that example, there's a big debate about a word like, say, sheep. You'll know that in the English language, there are several things where there's weird plurals, okay? And one of the things we're going to study is language change and how that's changed over time. So if you think about the word sheep, one sheep is a sheep, and several sheep are sheep. So does that include a morpheme or not? There's a big question about that in English. It's sort of, you've got the lexeme sheep, and that means one sheep, but does it include the morpheme plural? It's got the idea of a plural in it, but it doesn't actually have the suffix. So there's a big question about that. It's quite an interesting idea. I think if you think of other examples where perhaps we have an unusual plural suffix, so ox, for example, the suffix of, that would use to create a plural there wouldn't be ox. It's not oxes, it's oxen, which is something that we haven't used for hundreds and hundreds of years in English, but it's what we used to do to create plurals, but we don't do it anymore. It's been standardised to an S, but sometimes it just sort of carries on over time. So play around with it. Think about the words that you know, the words that you use, and how you're sort of creating new ones by inflectional affixes, by adding these little lexemes, un and a, prefixes and suffixes, and then also derivational morphology, where you're sort of adding things to create new words, to derive new words, and often how word class can change. So if you have an idea of, well, what types of suffixes and prefixes tend to change a word to an abstract noun. If I wanted to change it to an adverb, what would I tend to do in terms of a suffix? Probably ly in some sort of way. If I wanted to change it to an adjective, what would I do in terms of prefixes and suffixes? Okay, so that's morphology.